Hello everyone.
Hello everyone. During last week's conversation, we touched on the issue of silence, and we felt that before we move on to another subject, it would be good to stay a little with silence and focus today more on the practical aspect of it. It is so easy to talk a lot about it, but how does it play out? And to give some attention to that. And talking about silence, I think we mentioned it before, it's not a new practice within Christianity. It's actually a very, very old practice coming there from the earlier centuries of Christianity. And somewhere along the line, it moved more into the background, especially around the rise of rationalism as a philosophical stream, where the focus became more on the rational mind, our thoughts, how to apply that in creating and maintaining life. So then it moved more into the background. And only in the last few decades, there is a rediscovery of silence and the importance of that in our lives. I think to a large degree because we live such hectic, driven lives, and through silence we become centered, we become grounded, and there's a need for that, and discovering God in that groundedness. So there's definitely a moving back into that silence. And when we talk about silence, a lot of the things that we will touch on today, for people who have been doing this now for a number of years, it might sound very, very basic. And we apologize for that, and we ask that you tolerate us, but we know there's also a lot of people who are watching these videos, who are part of this conversation, who are new on this journey, and they have questions. How does it work? How do you become quiet? How do you enter the silence? And today's session is predominantly focused on people there at the beginning of the journey. You want to say something about time and space?
I think we also touched on it last week, that it is really important to have somewhere where you can go, where it can be reasonably quiet and where you will not be disturbed for the period that you've set yourself to become quiet. A certain time, if you can manage to do it on a regular basis at a certain time in the day, that's very helpful. And it also becomes almost like a habit, and you start to miss it if you don't get to doing it. I think it's important to not feel that it's another chore
or an obligation,
another Christian thing that we have to do, but that it is actually a time of respite, a time of really allowing yourself to rest in God and to be carried, so that it's also something that you really, really can look forward to.
Yeah, it's entering into a space where God is always present, but where we long to be. So to enter into that space. It's important to remember that it is not so much in achieving a goal. I'm going to set myself this task. I'm going to become very quiet and striving to reach that. Through the silence, it's more a matter of discovering where we are coming from. We almost rise out of this silence, and we become so flustered and very active that we that we lose sight of our own source, where we come from, and in the silence we enter into that
So
source
it's
again.
actually going back to where
Yes.
you're starting from.
Yeah. So when we rest in the silence, it's not achieving the stillness and the silence, but it is returning to the silence and that source. So it is important to remember that. One can expect thoughts to be something of a nuisance. They constantly come up, especially when we become quiet. We enter a space of rest. It's almost as if then it's the time for different thoughts to come to the fore, where it says, so have you attended to this telephone call? Have you notified this person? Have you returned that email? All those thoughts will come rushing in. And it's important to take note of it. It's not fighting the thoughts. It's not keeping them at bay and pushing them back. They will come. Not fighting the thoughts, but not attaching yourself to the thought. So in other words, it comes, you take notice and you let it pass. Almost like a cloud floating by. So you don't get attached to the thought. You take notice because they will be there. And you'll also see that breathing is such an important aspect of the silence practice. It helps us to focus on the here and the now. And when the thoughts come up, you return to the breathing. You can also use a word. It can be a one-syllable word, love. Not necessarily, but it tends to work well. I find that counting, especially initially, when I enter into the silence, on breathing in, it's 1. Exhaling, it's 2. Breathing in, 3. Exhaling, 4, up to 10, and then starting over again, repeating that cycle. And it centers me and it brings me back. And then after a few of those cycles, I switch over to the word that I love to use, Christ. So constantly using the word Christ, that brings me back to being centered.
I like that image of using the word like a windscreen wiper. So when the thought comes like rain on the windscreen, just use the word and clean the screen.
Yeah. So the thought will come and the thought will come and don't be too harsh on yourself. Don't say, I have to get this right. Nobody's really getting this right. You don't have PhD candidates in silence. It is a practice, and some days are good days, some days are bad days, where you really struggle, but just keep at it. It's not so much in the getting it right, but in returning to the silence, returning to the silence. And it might be that you do your sit. We often talk of doing our sit. That you do your sit for 20 minutes. In general, we sit for about 20 minutes, but you can start off 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever works for you. And at the end of that period, you say, but nothing happened, or I can't feel any change. Just trust the process. In the majority of cases, nothing will happen. But you'll find that in the long run, things change in your life. You approach challenges and difficulties from a different place. And it definitely, it makes a difference. So you see it in the fruit of the practice, and not so much as an experience during the practice necessarily.
I think it's also been now discovered by science that just the returning to the silence in itself, the practice of returning to the silence, is laying new brain paths, which helps us to become aware of things at a deeper level.
And to approach problems from a much more creative perspective, because we're not set in a certain groove of doing things in this way. In the silence and in the new pathways, we explore new avenues of problem solutions as well. Good. Let's become quiet. During this session, we're going to have it more as a guided session to help you to just get a feel of it. We find that it helps to have a timer. You can set your cell phone timer on a certain time. If you decide on 10 minutes, set your timer so that you don't have to worry about the time. We'll also post some handy apps, the links to such apps that you can use for your sits. It helps very much. But for this session, it will be more of a guided meditation, a guided silence session, and just sit in a very relaxed position, in a comfortable chair, in an upright position so that you can breathe easily and deeply. With your feet flat on the ground. And your hands in your lap or on the armrest of the chair. We find it helpful to have the hands open, palms facing upward. A stance of receiving whatever God is giving to us, handing over to us. And come back to your breath. And it will be a slow pace, breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Breath is such a basic human activity, the first thing that we do when we are born, the last thing we do when we die. And in between, we often lose sight of the fact that we are constantly breathing. We don't pay any attention to it. By focusing on our breath and a slower tempo of our breath, we become aware of the life force that's constantly flowing through us. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Become aware of your body. There where your feet touch the ground. where your body is in contact with a chair. Where your arms and palms are resting. Come back to your body. When we become aware of God, God is always leading us to an awareness of ourselves. And thoughts may arise, but come back to the breathing. Become aware of any tension in your body. Where do you feel it? In your neck, your shoulders, between your eyebrows, in your jaw, in the pit of your stomach. Become aware and let it go. Relax in God. And constantly returning to your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Become aware of God looking at you lovingly, accepting you just as you are sitting there. Not because you're such a good achiever, a good organizer, very creative, just for who you are. Nothing to prove, nothing to project, nothing to protect. Just resting in God. constantly returning to your breath. And on the Amen, don't open your eyes immediately. Gently rise as if from the bottom of a pool or a lake to the surface of the water. Gently giving yourself time before you open your eyes. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Keep well.